Hi, everybody. You are listening to Judging Meghan with your host, Meghan Judge. Oh, God. I'm watching this right now or you're watching this. If you're watching this on YouTube right now, before I start, look how cute my glasses are. I mean, they're pretty cute. Crystal, do you think these are cute?
Adorable.
They're adorable. So this company that I love is called Benny's Eyewear. So if you're watching on YouTube right now, you can use code Meghan 10 to get 10% off. This is a brand new company that launched. They are sturdy. They're gorge. They're made in Italy. So they're just like, you could throw these things on the floor and they're going to be okay. I think I haven't tried that. So I don't think I'm supposed to, and I'm not really going to try it. But the most important thing is that they look cute, for as cute as I can look at my old age. All right. I'm going to start the show saying that. And if you're watching on YouTube, thank you to the 5 of you that watch on YouTube. Most people listen. I love all my listeners. I love the people that watch on YouTube. You're all wonderful. Take 2 seconds of your time to support my podcast by going on Apple or Spotify and leaving me a quick review if you're so inclined. It helps new listeners find me. And I think that's it. Oh, this is my story for the week. And I might bring Crystal in right now. I'm momming, like I've been momming now. I'm in year 14, almost year 15. And I see all these women because I walk the beach. My listeners know that, like, almost every day. That's my like mental health. Like, that's my therapy. And I see all these moms and they're walking with their strollers and, you know, looking at their babies and smiling. And I know not everybody's having an easy time, but usually people are smiling when they're strolling with their babies. And for me, that was such a happy time in my life. And I love my kids. I really, truly do. But all I ever wanted was daughters. And I didn't realize when people would say to me, oh, just wait till they become teenagers, what they actually really meant. And I'm not good at it. I just feel like I'm not good at momming a teenager. It's a really big struggle for me on a daily basis. What I find the hardest about it is feeling like no matter what I do, I can't get like the responses I used to get, or the moods, or like the slamming of doors in the face, or come pick me up from school, or I want you to order food. I'm not eating any of the food in the house. Crystal, I'm going to introduce you in a second, but I know we spoke briefly. You have boys. Can you relate to any of this? And how old are they?
I was relieved to have boys. So I feel you as a girl mom, because all my teachers at their school said, oh, the girls were 10 times worse every time. So I was relieved to have boys, because I do think it's easier in the teenage years, although I'm still dealing with a lot of the closed off. And what is with the whole new language? I say skibidi high ris sigma bruh when I pick them up now.
Oh my gosh. I don't understand what it means. I need a dictionary on how to understand. So I'm getting a lot of bro. I don't like bro. I feel like it's really that's actually one of the things that drives me the most crazy, because just the way I grew up, it's like, I'm mom. I'm not bro. Right. Yeah. Boys, all my friends that have boys are like, they don't really get it. And the moms of girls, I think, are more like, yeah, you just kind of look at each other and you go, are you okay?
Well, it's more of an emotional roller coaster, I would think, because like there's some of that. My oldest now, my 8-year-old is oblivious to. Of course, mine are polar opposite personalities. They're 12 and 8. Yeah, I've got young Sheldon and thinks he runs the world. So,
well, my 10-year-old is, she has her own stuff, but she's still like, I love you, mommy. She'll still hold my hand. Yeah. And sometimes, like, I was walking with my 10-year-old yesterday, and I'm just like an emotional person in general. Everyone knows that listens, but I was holding her hand, and I was like, in my head, I went, I know this is almost going to stop. And that period of like, where you're like, oh, they're not going to hold my hand anymore, or they're not going to like want to snuggle with me, or they're going to push me away, I know is like literally about to happen. Probably it could happen today. So any tips, listeners, please, some of you reach out to me sometimes, which I can't thank you enough. I live for it. If you are a mom of a teenage girl or you've been through it and you struggled with it, please reach out to me. I'm going to be doing an episode coming up pretty soon with a therapist specifically about momming teen girls, because I want to hear what they have to say, and my platform helps me get them to help me and talk about it. Okay, so that's my little spiel that I'm going to start with. We've all been put here for a reason, and we all deserve acceptance.
Judging Meghan with Meghan Judge.
I'm a trauma survivor from a really young age, and I have been diagnosed with complex PTSD in the past few years. I've been surrounded by death and abuse much of my life. I've been dragged through the mud and have been to the point of not wanting to go on anymore. Through my interviews with other survivors, I've learned that there is a way out. From recovering to surviving and thriving, we all have the strength to come out the other side.
You are listening to Judging Meghan.
Crystal, welcome to the podcast. Crysta Ball. I need to find out if that's your real name, first of all. So we'll ask that first. Crystal is an entrepreneur. She also is a survivor, a trauma survivor like I am, but she's going to talk to us all about her really difficult life growing up in a cult. And I am so honored and thrilled to have you on the podcast. Did I leave anything out, Crystal?
Well, thank you for letting me be here. It's been a challenge to get to the point where I could share this story. I had very good disassociation power for most of my life. But yes, that is my real name. When I got a divorce several years ago, I was definitely not going back to cult names. So I named myself.
I love the name. I think the minute that I got your bio, I was like, wait a second. Is this really her name? It's the coolest name. And I love that you owned it. And once you got out of that situation, which we're going to talk about right now, why not? I don't know if I could rename myself, what I would rename myself, but it must be pretty powerful to be able to take your life back and go, you know what? No, this isn't my name. This is my name now. Right?
Well, I was having to create a new identity because when I was 20 and left the cult, I lost my entire identity. I was no longer their daughter. They wouldn't speak to me. I was no longer the sister because I couldn't see the kids that I had raised. I was surrogate mom. I couldn't see the babies that so I'd lost my family, my church, my community, everything I knew. And so when I got a divorce after we had a very happy marriage, I had finally found happiness again. I had moved to my happy place in Florida. And we had opened a very successful new business. We were scaling really quickly. I had 2 little babies. Life was good. And then I lost my grandpa, who was like my dad. Is where I went after the cult. And I lost my grandmother. We had Hurricane Michael, a Cat 5 hurricane that wiped out half of our town. And my husband had a stroke.
So this is after you've gone through the whole thing. And that's horrifically awful. And I'm so sorry. I want to ask you, just before we talk about that horrifically hard piece of your life, because I know from reading your bio that you've been through, I would say, more than most people go through in several lifetimes. And so when I meet people like you, I love to have you on because I think it's so important. If I have people that are listening and they're struggling, or they're going, I don't want to keep going in this world. How do I do it? And then I meet somebody like you and you're just such a fighter. This is what I live for. And so again, like I said, I'm so honored to have you on, but I'm going to go backwards a little bit to your childhood, which I know was very, very difficult. Can we kind of start there and then?
Yes, I'm going to start there, but the reason I start at the divorce point, because that is what triggered that. Because the day after his stroke, I found out he had been lying since the day I met him, and he had never even been to college, and we were almost bankrupt.
Wait a second. You found out? Can you repeat that? You found out what?
So the day after his stroke, I was in the hospital talking to his sister and his cousin. I found out he had been lying since the day I met him.
Oh.
He had never been to college. All of the stuff that I had helped build the business, all of my money's in supporting this man because I have been taught to follow a man, right? That's part of the cult training, umbrella protection. We can't do this alone as women. We've got to have a man. And so I found out he'd been lying. That the sister and the uncle laughed. They're like, he didn't go to college. What are you talking about? I'm like,
Wait a second. And I'm sorry to interrupt. So once you got out of the cult and you were 20 years old, and then you thought you were safe, and you're in this whole new lifetime with a new person.
20 years later, there's a big gap there. So I didn't get married. Oh, I married young, but then that was very quickly.
Okay.
Yeah. But no, when I finally moved to my happy place, I had gone through counseling after miscarriages. Like I have had an extensive amount of trauma, but this was 6 years ago when we started the business. And then the stroke all this was about 6 years ago with Hurricane Michael. All of this happened in the same year. I lost my grandpa and my husband in that same year again. That triggered the same survival mode that had happened in the cult. So because everybody kept asking me, because I very successfully turned this around, like in a way that everybody kept asking me, how are you doing what you're doing? And the answer to that question was, I was raised in a cult. So that's when I had to go back and deal with the underlying issues like significantly, because I was having I don't break down in survival mode. I break down after. Once I have cleaned up the mess and I have restabilized financially, right? Because that was one of the things, in cult land, and just for reference, the cult I was raised in is called, on Amazon last year, the show that came out, Shiny Happy People, that was the cult I was raised in. So my cousin had said it was a cult from the time I left, and she's kind of like my surrogate mom now. But no one identified it as a cult back then. It was just a hyper religious. A lot of Baptists went into this. Bill Gothard was the Gideon Bible founder's son, so he held conventions all over the United States. I went to the basic life principles seminars. I went to the Advanced Training Institute of America. They had this homeschool curriculum. So from age 14 to 20, I had never been out of the house alone. I'd never had a job except working for my parents in a cleaning business that we would routinely work till 9, 10 o'clock at night in, raising 6 younger siblings. And, they teach a lot of character traits that are good, like discipline and responsibility and gratitude and all of these wonderful things. The problem with getting, the book I'm writing is about control, and it's the addiction to control. I think drugs, alcohol, and sex are the most popular addictions, but I think a lot of times then people go to religion because it's more socially acceptable. It's more cultural, but I think it's an addiction all the same.
Well, let me go back a teeny bit. So you're like, and I always start every podcast, but thank you for kind of explaining that's like how it all pieces together. And it's also a really good example of, I had Henry Shukman on, who's like this amazing yogi, like guru, that came on probably like a month or 2 ago. And we talked a lot about, even though you go through trauma and you're like, you're supposed to have like this bow tied, and here I am, I got out of the cult and now my life is great. And then there's like the hurricane, which was a category 5, which I'm so sorry. And like the loss. And then you find out the lies, that there's no such thing in life as the bow being tied. It just doesn't exist. Because we're going to keep going through hard things. So it's how you do it, which is why I think you're so amazing that you're able, with all of the stuff you've gone through, to go, okay, wait a minute, I'm going to keep doing this. This bow is never going to be fully tied. I have news for everybody. Your bow's never going to be fully tied in life. It just isn't. Sorry, it doesn't end that way. Your bow will be tied maybe when, if you believe in God, we get upstairs. So tell me, I always start the podcast with like, tell me about your life, tell me about your childhood. But you're telling me before you got into this cult at age 14, you grew up like in a family with multiple kids, correct? And were struggling?
Well, my mom left home at 15 and married my real dad.
Okay.
He split at 18. He split when he may have been 21. They were very, very young. So she had me and Amy really young, and he left. his brother had committed suicide and he found him. So you can imagine a 22-year-old kid spinning out, right?
Yeah.
And she's, Mrs. Religious Perfect High. They have a diagnosis for what's wrong with my mother now. It's called high anxiety. And so, but she back in those days, they don't, they didn't have the terminology that we have around these things now. That it was non-existent then.
Mm-hmm.
So we went back to live with my grandparents. So my grandparents were the constant in my life. They were always there. But my grandpa was a Southern Baptist pulpit pounding, hellfire damnation preacher. So it's not like I ever went very far outside the cult, right?
Yeah.
So she met my stepdad on my 5th birthday and married him in 2.5 months. She was a nurse and he owned a weightlifting gym. They were very in their mid-20s, very young, and so she had Jake, Amy, Sarah, Caleb. Like, she started popping out babies, and they got more and more into. And my mother adores babies. Like, she is just made to have babies, and that's wonderful. Except for when your babies grow up, and they need to leave the nest. There is a point where you need to support them growing up, not keeping them as children because you're scared they'll do the same things and make the same mistakes. That was their intention in controlling us. They wanted to make sure we didn't make the same mistakes they had. But that is not effective parenting method. That's one thing I have learned. I parent extremely differently because, and again, it may not be better, but I am very much an open and honest, transparent proponent, especially now after what happened with my now ex-husband. I'm a huge Brene Brown fan now. She taught, Brene Brown. She taught so much about vulnerability, transparency. So when I started counseling this time around, the counselor and my best friend, who's a hospice nurse, the highest EQ of any human I've ever met, they said in the same week, "You sound just like Brene Brown." And what I realized was, while Brene Brown was doing academic research in communications, that was actually my major in college, I was doing field research on controlling men most of my life. I mentally programmed myself to be a man. I worked in corporate America most of my life. I ran in very male-dominated industries, and I made myself think just like a man as a self-protective measure, not to have more abuse and control, that hyper control. I did not understand those things at the time and how I was shaping my life, but that's the aftermath now. Looking back, is that's exactly what I did. So I came to the same conclusion she did, that being honest and transparent is really the only path forward. It's what heals. It's what, and we all struggle with the same core emotions. The way they control in a cult, all that brainwashing is, it's not just fear, it's not just shame, and it's not just guilt. It's a combination of those three. So fear was the number one emotion of my childhood. I thought I was going to hell over every move I made. I have nightmares about waking up, the rapture happening, and I'm going to be taken. There's so much fear around these religious fairy tales is what I call them now. I had read the Bible cover to cover for 7 times. All of my education background from 5th grade on was religious based. And my mom said I was a girl. I did not need math. My job was to have babies for God. And, so I had probably the equivalent of a 6th grade education at 20 years of age. But I could run a business because we had a cleaning business. And so I was like a 35-year-old, 40-year-old in my ability to produce income and run a household. But I was like a 12-year-old in my mentality, understanding of the world. We didn't listen to secular music. I had even to this day, I have no frame of reference on this huge part of culture that I should know because I was not in it. I didn't have the few friends that we had were other homeschool. They were just like us. You could see homeschoolers coming a mile away. We dressed a certain way. We had this demure. I know demure is a popular social term now.
Right
but
now.
In our world,
Yeah.
In our world, in cult land, it meant we speak like this because we are servants of God and we're going to obey our masters because the men we're nothing without the men. We have to, so it's this whole song and dance about you are not going to be independent. You are, there is no place. And so I was so madly in love with my siblings and my family. I would write their names over and over and over. That was my identity, was in being a part of that family. And I was the oldest and I was in charge of everything, at home, and everybody thought I was the mom. Mom was, had high depression levels. I think, I'd find her in a closet or, she's in bed sick half the time, pregnant, so I was running everything. They put me wherever the heaviest workload was. They called me Cinderella. They thought it was funny. I didn't realize at the time how much of a physical toll it was taking, but I was always a little super nerd and expressed a lot of those emotions through writing. So I kept diaries and journals that eventually turned into letters that we were writing to other homeschoolers and people in the cult. So I kept all of those. And even when I escaped, that was the thing I took with me, is this huge file box full of all these letters. And so I didn't look at them for over 20 years until 2 years ago, after settling the survival mode out of that divorce and restabilizing my family in a very effective, non-traditional way. But my boys are thriving and everybody's grounded. We co-parent like magically now. Everything is good. Then I was like, I got to go back and deal with this. So I started reading those letters and working with a great counselor. And as I could only read 2 or 3 sentences without just bursting into tears. And I'm not much of a crier. Like we were trained not to have emotion. Emotion was bad. Any negative emotion was bad because God said, be happy.
Wait a second. I have to stop you for a second because this is, it's so much. And I like the religious aspect of this. And I can relate like a teeny bit, okay? Because I grew up Catholic and I know that's very, very different. But like if I'm trying to be like on the level of like religion and some of it being like shoved, like we call it Catholic guilt. And a lot of like people that grew up that way. Plus, and I'm still Christian, by the way, I'm still Catholic. But in my religion, by the way, and the way that I'm more spiritual than anything, I believe we treat everybody with love and kindness and do not treat anybody like they're going to hell for anything, by the way. I don't believe like God thinks that way. I really don't. Right. So that's just my opinion. But I just can't comprehend or wrap my head around the amount of damage that does to a child, being told like, don't speak up, be like, you use the word demure. 'Cause that guilt stays with you forever. Like the sexual piece of it, by the way, as a kid, right? Which I'm sure you can relate to this, is like, I remember one time in high school, a teacher told us, well, if God wanted us to have condoms, because I went to a very like strict Catholic school, and there was a nun, I think, that told us this, they would have come attached. And I remember thinking like, that's not normal. Like what? And so even into adulthood, I've been with my husband 23 years, but you still have this piece of it. And I would love to know how you feel. And I know I'm kind of skipping where these things kind of like are tucked away in your head and you go, oh, wait a minute, is this wrong? And I only had it to like a small degree. So I wonder like the amount of like the cult and all of that stuff being like shoved into your head. You're like, your brain is going, how do I even do this? Right?
Yeah, it's I called it brain explosions.
Explosions.
Everything was like, it was, when I got out, well, even before I got out, just as you mature and grow, you hear things in the world. And we were like little political activists too. Like we were campaigning for him to run as state representative because that was part of the cult culture, is we got to take the lead because the United States is going to hell because everybody's bad. Right. So it was this, and that negative survivor guilt because the world's a bad place. You're always at war because Satan, it was a very repressive and hyper controlled culture. But I'll never forget Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky's scandal was on television, and I am 20 years old. This is shortly before.
I remember.
Right. And I asked my mom, I said, oh, so oral sex is like talking about it, like on the phone. I think that's what oral sex is. And she laughed at me. And I'm like, well, that's kind of rude to laugh at me. You won't allow me to read anything or have any education, but you're going to make fun of me because I don't know this. Like, I remember feeling like, that's not, there was a lot of inadvertent digging, but that's, again, they control through shame. And I think by that time, mom was so fried from having so many children and being so beat down. The hypocrisy in these religious cults, I believe every cult is, every religion is somewhat of a cult. All of them have they have some fundamentals of this. And so, but the effect of it, yes, psychologically, I did not realize how much it was affecting me, because hypersexuality is a very common trauma response. And so we had to be a virgin when we married, right? So I got married about a year after leaving the cult, so I had to be a virgin. But they never discussed alternate forms of sex. So perhaps I'll get into heaven, but I'm not really quite sure, because I didn't know those things existed, but I had tested those out before I actually,
this is actually, I know this. This is very common, because I have read up on this. I'm not going to say in what religion, but I won't say what religion, but I think if you listeners and you know what I'm talking about, it's very common.
Yes. So I had a very warped sense of reality, and I had to do years of self-correcting. And even now I have, one, I did not intend to be single at this age, and dating at this age is quite a riot. But
well, you look like 30 years old. You just told me you were 20. I'm like, we're around the same age. So you look great. Whatever you're doing, you look fantastic.
Well, thank you. I'm 46, and I have really, but it's funny, because I have taken time to heal and get I never paid attention to myself. Being selfish is a sin. So you are not, there was no concept of me as a human.
Yeah.
When I came out of that cult, I thought of myself as a production machine for God, right? To have his babies, to have, and these letters and journals are just absolutely horrifying to go back and read, because they're heartbreaking, because the sense of isolation, you can just hear the desperation for any type of connection. And you can see, they had me at 15 years old writing to a guy twice my age to be betrothed in marriage to. I have a 4-year conversation with a man who wound up being a concordance writing hermit, and he's a Canadian rocket scientist. What kind of parent does that, in America especially? So that's one of the quotes in my book, is that my America was not free. We're promised freedom in America. I had no freedom of choice, no freedom of what to wear, no freedom of what to say, do, think, be, nothing.
Can I ask you a question? Because I think right now in this climate, especially, I think people with religion in general, or whatever it is, they're just looking for something, right? So at the root of your mom joining the cult is a root to find not a bad intention behind it. I'm sure it's I want to find belonging. I want to find purpose. I want to find spirituality. I want all of these things together, but then it turns into at the root of all cults is money, greed, all of the bad things behind it. But people in general find themselves, I think, so easily wanting to join these because the people just need answers, right? Am I wrong on that?
No, it's why was Hitler able to do what he did? Because he stepped up and he acted like an authority. Yes. And even in real estate, I got swept up into all these gurus who tell you all these colloquial terms in business, that use OPM. And I can teach it well, right? Because I can pick up the verbiage and vernacular of any industry very quickly. But it's, when you, I just read Finding Meaning in the Second Half of Life, and I think that a lot of what people are really searching for is meaning, and people who are in religion tend to act like the authority on that, because God, God is not what saved me out of that. God had nothing to do. I've read the Bible cover to cover 7 times. I prayed more than any human on this planet. Okay. But listening to my internal instincts to guide me. And so and that's one of the things in religion, they say, if you are a God and God is in you, well, then the key is here anyway. And so I'm like you, I'm more spiritual now because I look internal. What do I think? And when I trust my own gut instincts for what I need for me, my life falls into line. When I don't, when I try to do what society, religious, familial expectations guide me in, I get very much out of my happy place every time. And so I don't believe in left or right wing. I think that we're looking at this all wrong. This is part of what's in my book. I've got a butterfly analogy. The wings of that butterfly do not tell it where to go. The heart and the mind do.
Oh my God, we're the same person. And I was afraid because I told you in the beginning, I was like, I might touch on this. And listeners, I am going to say this. I mean, and I'll bring it up. I was going to bring it up at the end. But like, in my opinion, left, right, wrong. It's very scary. But I do think like as a person, we need to vote for the lesser of two evils. That's my opinion, because it's very scary what's happening in the world. But I do think that, and that's part of why I was so drawn to your story, because I'm like, it could be so easy to fall into like you just brought up left, right. So if you think a certain way, I'll use left because I lean more left. I will say that, that I'm supposed to follow every single thing that they say and believe every single thing that like they say. And I think it's normal as a human being to question religion, question authority, question everything. I think as a person, if you're not doing that, you're not fully living your life. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. 100%, because I was told exactly what to do.
Yeah.
And I had to perform exactly. Okay. Until I pushed back and said, hey, I'd rather die at this point. Like that, everybody always asks me, how'd you get out? Well, the day I left, I was suicidally depressed. Suicide runs heavy.
You were 20. You were 20, right, Crystal?
20 years old, living their life, running their business, and there had been another, I call him a pop-up kid. The police had popped up on our doorstep, and he had to do a DNA test, and they lied and said that was not their kid, but it was. So guess who's working to pay the child support for kid number 8?
Okay, so you were one of 7 at that point, right? You were running the business. You're the oldest child. You're in this cult. You also at that point had your own, am I wrong? You had your own children at that point? No. Okay. So what made you finally like say, I'm done? Was it them coming to the door? Tell me that piece of it.
No, that had happened before that, but I'm saying it was building. It was getting much worse. There was more stress on the plate. There's more. I was having to do more. We didn't even vacation the last couple of years because they were getting so much more into the cult belief system. They were spending money on political stuff and all this curriculum and like so we didn't have money for basics, and you know they believe in fasting, so there was some malnourishment there because when you're working a teenage girl like an adult man in her, you know, then you need extra food. But, you know, they were always on these weird diets and, you know, it was just, anyway, the journals outline a lot of the day-to-day crazy. But the day I left, I was crying, suicidally depressed. And instead of recognizing that, they just decided I had a bad attitude. I was not, you know, showing God's happy character traits I'm supposed to. And God says, be happy. You're not happy. So they decided to give me a list of punishments. I couldn't walk into Walmart ahead of them. Got to stay in my place. I couldn't answer the phone, go to the mailbox. I mean, those were the few bits of freedom that they could had. Like it's asinine even saying some of the things I say, the verbiage that I use in the courtship and betrothal and marriage and all these things. Mm-hmm. It's just today me is like, what the hell were they thinking, right? Yeah. So all these punishments. And then my mom said, look at her face, John, just beat her. She is just rebellious. And I'm like, well, the beatings had stopped at 14. I like to think that I told him to stop, but I believe that a guy that owned the business that we cleaned this like 100-man warehouse in Coleman, Alabama. And I think that the president of the company saw him beating me with the belt against the wall for a bad attitude. It was always a bad attitude. If you look at him wrong, you think, again, he was a Marine drill sergeant, like legit. So that was his background. So it was an extra heavy hand, you know. So anyway, so the beatings had stopped at that point. So my mother is sitting here telling him to beat me at 20. And I'm going, something just clicked in my head. I'm like, nope. If I stay here, he's going to continue beating these babies. He's going to continue. They're not going to survive this. I was the strongest. I was the most capable. I got to change this for them. Like something's got to be different because they can't, you know. And I'm going to kill myself if I stay. I'm done. So I just know there's no hope left. So I packed the stuff that day. Not that I had much stuff. I had $76 and, you know, a few clothes and like it was all thrift store garage sale that we never had, you know, just basics of things. And I had a nice, a long chat with one of the top realtors in Dallas. He's a friend of mine and had referred a client. And as we talked about it, he said, you know, Crystal, I have PTSD raising my daughter. And I realized that that's a lot of what you talk about struggling as a mom when you've had past trauma. When I see my kids play soccer or baseball, I never got to play a sport. When I see them in a new pair of shoes, I never had a new pair of shoes. When I see them with friends, I never had friends that I was not, like, they would monitor our entire conversation. Like, I had no privacy. I'd never slept in my own bed. I never had, like, I was not a person individually at all. So at that point, I decided to leave, and I packed my stuff that day while I was babysitting. There was always responsibility. I was taking care of the kids while I was doing this. Mom came back to bring the groceries in. So I'm helping bring the groceries in and sneaking my stuff out. You know, it was a circle in the house. So I drove to my grandparents that night, knocked on their door about 10:30. And, you know, he said, "Crystal, honey, what's wrong?" And I said, "Well, I need to stay here." And I didn't tell him what was wrong. Like, my grandpa had been in the Korean War, and I think he realized I had PTSD just in that moment, because I was just, you know, I wasn't crying. There was no emotion. I was just frozen, you know, like just trying, you know, and I, you know, in doing the trauma therapy now, there's fight or flight, freeze or fawn. I was frozen for most of my life. Okay. And then fawning to just cowering to just do whatever to survive for most of my life. Then I had flight mode, but I never fought my entire life until 2 years ago, when I decided I've had all I can take of this world. I am done with people running all over me, taking advantage of me. The people pleasing had gotten way out of control, right? And I've got, you know, I had nothing left to give in me. So that's when I started fighting for me and went back to counseling and took care of me. But that was really the first time in my life. And as I uncovered these letters and went back through this, I was like, oh my God. And I would get really mad at myself the first few months in counseling. I'm like, this is like so glaringly obvious. How did I not see this? I'm like, duh, you know. But, you know, as you start to understand disassociation and what PTSD does, my favorite book through all of this is Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score, because I've had a lot more physical issues as I've gotten older than most people my age. But if you look at the amount of work and stress that has been on me for so much of my life, it's very obvious, right? And so, but anyway, I escaped that night, and several days later, we had to take the van back that night. Otherwise, they would have called the cops and reported that. But then we didn't hear from them for several days. And I'm sitting around like, and I'll never forget the next morning when I woke up alone, that gut-wrenching pit in my stomach feeling like, what have I done? I wake up in a bed alone. I'd never slept alone. I'd never been alone. I go to eat breakfast. I don't have a kid to feed. I don't know what to do with myself. I didn't have to cook the meal. Like, I did not know what to do with myself, right? Like, it was just I was so uneasy feeling for those next few weeks. So my grandparents were missionaries and traveled around singing at churches, and I sang with them, playing the guitar at these churches. And
did you find that, like, I mean, I'm silent because I'm just like, how? Like, part of me is like, how? Like, that's all I keep thinking. And again, like, these kinds of things in life, like, everybody's experience is different. But the PTSD part of this, like you talked about, must be so hard to deal with all these years later, because it's like I talk about this on the podcast. I was diagnosed with complex PTSD, and I've blocked out some of my childhood. Like, I just have, it's a weird protective mechanism that our brain is able to do this, right? It's almost like when somebody dies, you know, we don't really know what to say, even if you have gone through grief multiple times, like I have in my own life. I still don't want to be reminded of it. So I still struggle with the right things to say to people. Do you understand what I'm saying there? It's like,
absolutely.
Yeah, it's like the weirdest thing. And then, so when I hear you talking and you're just like, yeah. And so then I just escaped and I went, and then I was singing, I was a missionary, and then I slept in my own bed. Like, literally, like like my jaw was, I'm not a quiet person. And I was like, I don't even know what to say here. Right.
Well, it's funny when I say, like I was on a boat with some clients or some friends this week. We're starting a new boat club here, and they asked about my name, and I said, I wasn't going back to cult name. And later on in the day, when I started telling them my story, they're like, "What? You I thought you were joking. That's the normal response I get to when I say I was raised in a cult. Like, and I look, that's one of the things I've struggled with going through these letters. How the hell did no one around me see what was going on? Like the priest of the Catholic Church that we cleaned, how did they not see that this Marine drill sergeant is barking orders at his very young teenage daughters and working them like slaves all hours of the night? How did they not see this? How did the president of the big warehouse we were cleaning? How did the family and friends that we were around? How did they not see and like do anything about it? Because child services my parents left the state and no one knew where they were for several years after that, because child services were likely going to get the kids because they couldn't run the cleaning business after me. So they handed the keys to these businesses in the big Catholic church in town to me at 20 years of age because I was running the business.
So wait, so you ended up to answer your question on that, by the way, because I question people all the time. And I think as I get older and I'm in my brain, I've learned, okay, my husband gets mad at me all the time because he says, not everybody treats people the way that you treat them. And that's something that I've had to learn, which is really, really hard because I've gotten my heart broken a million times by people because I'm like, well, I wouldn't have done that. I would have done this, this, and this. And by the way, I'm no saint. Like, please know that I'm a freaking nightmare and I do bad things all the time. In fact, I chased some guy down the street that yelled at me yesterday because my hormones are out of control. I didn't really chase him, but he was, anyways. Yeah, that point aside, I'm just trying to say I'm no saint. But I don't understand. I do understand as I'm getting older that people want to look away because it's easier.
Right.
So I'm sure that those people were like, that's not normal. But do I want to spend the time to do something about it?
Right. Well, and the thing, I would have acted like everything was I was trained to defend everything that we did, and I thought we were God, and so I thought we were right. I thought the whole world was wrong. I thought everything was sending everybody to hell. So I was hooked. And that's again why these letters are so heartbreaking, because I look at what I wrote and how I was hook, line, and sinker. I was in fact, I took I'm such a perfectionist, right? High trauma response. There's some psychological tendencies that you're going to, and I know that part of this is just my DNA. That's one of the things with parenting that I realized, I didn't meet my real dad till after I left the cult. And it was like going from, God, that's what a cult leader thinks he's God, right? So I go from God to Satan, because my real dad was he drank, he smoked, he liked women, he had a Playboy picture above his bed. I thought he was going to hell over everything he did. So I show up looking like an Amish school marm, I'm sure, and he hops out of a red Acura Integra GSR, says, "Hey, doll," and he's showing me pictures of himself in a green Speedo. An hour later, I'm like, I've never seen a man in a Speedo, much less my own father. I went from the frying pan to the fire. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm so adamant about balance and why I do this. I'm a data analyst anyway, so my brain works. So I do a lot of comparing and contrasting. And that's why with the left wing, right wing, that's what I've realized is that the balance of it. And this is going in the book. I've got a chart, a butterfly chart, but it shows the balance of what we're looking for in the middle. And the biggest thing, the turning point for me was when, after I left, I went to my grandparents that night. About 3 days later, he calls. He's like, "Crystal, we got to call him and see what's going on." I'm like, "Please don't call him, Papa." Well, he went across the street to my aunt's house to make that phone call. And when he came back, my grandpa strolled around his farm. He was almost running back. And I was like, me and Mima were looking out the window. She's like, "What's wrong with Neil?" I'm like, "Oh God." And I think I go into fear mode. I'm like, "Oh God, I know what a mad man looks like. Yeah. I'm well versed in this." So I go into coward mode. He throws open the door, he says, and he's red to hear, right? He's so angry. He slings open that door, and I'm like, "Oh God." He goes, "Crystal, honey, that's how they've been talking to you all these years. No wonder you're left. You're my girl now." And he bear hugged me. Oh. And that was the first time in my life I'd ever felt safe. Oh. And so I know. And so he was always my rock. What he did different was unconditionally love me. Now, don't think that I didn't go do some crazy shit. Okay. Now, everybody thinks I went wild right after. Hell no, I didn't. I was scared I was going to hell over everything. I tried to be perfect and I wanted my family back. So many people out of trauma hate the people that put them through trauma. I loved my family. I still love my family. I have tried all these years to be a part of that family. But then I've realized now they have not let me talk about this in all these years. They are completely in denial about what has happened. They have not admitted it's a cult. The sister next to me, it was also my real dad's. She can't utter a sentence without God in it.
Is this cult still going on?
Well, Bill Gothard got in trouble for sexually harassing young girls,
okay.
and Jim Bob Duggar, the Duggar kids, 19 kids and counting family.
Yeah.
So he did the sex offense website. He did that registry system that is, I think, is completely asinine. The way they handle all this, our legal system is a mess. But
yeah,
he was raising a pedophile, diddling his own kids, and that incestuous sexual abuse culture, repression causes that. Right? You've heard these stories of kids who are allowed to drink and try, weed's not a big deal. You just normalize these behaviors and you teach them balance and self-control. Those children typically come out significantly better than the stereotypical preacher's daughter who's been kept under a thumb and repressed, right? Mm-hmm. So my philosophy these days is that repression it's such a facade, and the cult show was so aptly named because it's shiny, happy people. To look at us, we were, the perfect little family and everything was good. And, but the biggest part of that, the biggest hypocritical part of that for me was when I was 15, Mom took a pregnancy test and she was pregnant and I was in the bathroom with her and she's like crying, not wanting that baby. She's already got 5 kids with this complete asshole who is nonstop verbally abusive to all of us, right? And she doesn't want this kid. And then she puts on her shiny, happy people face and goes out and tells everybody God's blessed her with another child. I'm 15 years old. That is a brain explosion to a young teenager who is going to raise that baby like her own. And then she does that at 18 with my brother. So I've got 2 babies that were practically mine. Like I was there. They were home births, midwives and and doctor, this whole thing, right? So, looking back through the letters, it's like glaringly obvious that even like basic medical care, basic health care, I had never been to an OBGYN. We had such a limited understanding of the world. My education level was non-existent. And so what I've realized through a lot of this counseling this time around is, I had to look at what my drivers were. All these people in real estate, and boy, I made I was very successful as an entrepreneur. I've been successful whatever I did professionally because I buried myself in work out of that.
Yeah, we're kind of skipping ahead there, but I do want to touch on that because I think just that and it makes sense because I do have a question. Once you got out at 20, then you just kept going, but did you ever really get into counseling to understand what was going on, or was it just later in life?
It was when I had miscarriages.
Okay.
When I had my first miscarriage, and it triggered the lot. I didn't really I knew for years. I would see a kid that looked like one of my siblings, and I just burst into tears. I cried myself to sleep every night missing those babies because I had raised them, and so that has been by far and away the hardest part of any of it because it was, and I did not understand that had impacted me that much until the miscarriage. And so I went to counseling for a year and it was very helpful. It got me a lot more recentered, and I started, and the counselor said, Crysta, it's okay to feel. And I'm like, that felt so foreign to me because it had never been okay to feel anything in my life. We were taught to act like everything's perfect, right? Which is why I was so good at business. I know, I learned men really quickly. Men are very easy. So,
just so I understand. I worked in a male dominated sales job for very, very long. And I was never the smartest in school. I wanted to be an actress and I would get teased for being a dumb blonde, but I'm telling you, I could sell circles around those men because I understood how to deal with it. And I also think that instinctually you're a fighter.
Yes.
So you had to fight your whole life. And so it's not surprising to me at all that you're a rock star entrepreneur at all.
And also, I was unattainable. I was incapable of truly loving anyone. I had never been shown true love other than my grandpa, who was, not, as much as I adored him, he was a racist. He was at 86 when he passed away. He was a wonderful human, but he was so there, that rural American culture, super racist, super hypocritical.
Deep South, right? Alabama. Did you say Alabama? Yeah. Deep South. Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't, I tend to be very left leaning. I am fiscally Republican because of the insane financial construct of our society. That's a lot of what I'm writing about. I've done a lot of analysis on how systems work, right?
Oh, I can't wait to read your book, by the way, because I can relate to that in very many ways. And I think for people like us, it's exceptionally hard right now because fiscally I can relate, but then in every other way,
right?
Morally, I'm like, no.
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, America is a great. It's the greatest marketing scam of all time. We believe this facade. Again, I was raised in shiny happy, so I'm a master marketer and master sales, right? That's what I'm an expert in.
Yeah.
But now that I can see through the haze to the reality of it, it is heartbreaking how capitalism is corrupting basic humanity. And I think that's the point of implosion that we're at right now in America. So a lot of what I'm writing it's very disruptive because it's not popular to say, hey, because from my analysis so far, and I've done a lot of research and I know a lot of humans. I was a journalism major. I interview well, right? I've interviewed a lot of people through the years. I think if we locked up 90% of the political and religious leaders right now and let 90% of the people out of jail, our world would be a better place because I think we've got it backwards.
Interesting. That's an interesting concept.
Well, it's fake. It's all a fake facade. And in real estate, the government is so insanely involved and there's such an overlap of conflict of interest between what I'm seeing, right? We don't have an affordable housing problem. We have a government problem because 43% of every new housing start is a government regulatory cost.
Okay. I agree with you there 100%. And I'm living in LA. So it's like a very California. We all as states have our issues. But right now, what are our choices? Okay. So that's the thing. You're a woman. I deal with a lot of women. One of my best friends is going through a horrifically awful divorce right now and custody issues and was horribly abused. And I'm watching the court system just tear women apart. I think a lot of this is just being female. And I know we're getting kind of off track, but I think at the core of what you're talking about and the whole analogy of the butterfly, which by the way, I don't know if you know that, well, you probably don't, but my sign that my best friend is with me, who I lost in my 20s, is the butterfly. So that's how I always know she's with me. So it's the monarch butterfly. So butterflies have this magical meaning to me. So I love you're saying that the wings and it all makes sense. I think at the core of everything, and this is just me meeting you for however many minutes we've been talking, at the core of everything you're talking about, and I say this all the time when I meet people like you, I've been doing this 4 years, is people that have gone through a large amount of trauma are usually some of the smartest people I've ever met.
Because we have to be.
Right? Yeah. Because you've learned from a very young age, and I'm emotional. You said you're not, I am. So if I cry, I'm sorry. But you've learned from a really young age that you have no other option. So what are our options? It's either to stay and keep fighting, or it's to peace out. And those are our only two options when you've gone through a horrific amount of trauma like you have. So to circle back to all of this, I have to tell you, like everything you've said, like I wish I was there so I could give you a hug because I consider you my friend now. I'm friends with many of my guests. But just that, like what you did and what you're doing and the fact that you're saying like, listen, like I'm a good mom. Most people can't say that have been through what you've gone through. I mean, I just said in the beginning, I'm like, I feel like I'm a really crappy mom sometimes. Like, I don't know how to do this. And I don't want my trauma to repeat into my children, you know? That's my thing I have to deal with. Yeah. Go ahead.
I have to work at it really hard. I mean, it's not something it's very difficult for me because I do have such severe PTSD and a normal routine with them.
Yeah.
We have a very non-traditional setup, but the kids are thriving. And my boys know that they are loved and supported no matter what. And that's what I didn't have. Like, I think fundamentally you can mess up a lot of things, but if you get that right, those kids, that's what would have been the differentiation for me is
to feel like you're loved, And then you brought up like, which broke my heart was like, I never got to play soccer. I never got like a new pair of shoes and just like the missing out piece. But like to go back for the sake of time to like present day. Okay. So you went through that horrific hurricane. You went through like the loss. You found out you were being betrayed and lied to. So it was like all over again, this giant wave just like crashing down on you. How did you do it?
Yeah, what I did different than my parents. I chose the path of forgiveness. I didn't exclude anybody, even so. And I think that this is where people go through all these horrific divorces. I didn't. I have the people that I have chosen to love, I have loved unconditionally. So even my husband, even though he was lying, even though all of this, it did kill the marriage because I didn't want to be married to a liar, right?
Yeah.
And it's a habitual problem because he hasn't addressed his past. But I honestly directly told him all that. What I did was I bought him a house. I financially stabilized all of us, and I listed him for sale at the house at the conclusion of all that. But I worked with him for that next year. I slept in the same bed with our child between us the next year, making sure he didn't die, rehabbing him, working together to get out of the financial mess that we were in. We did it together, even though that marriage was done. And sometimes in that sea of change, you can't get everything you want the day you want it. But if you choose continually the right path, and part of the reason I did that was because he's respectful. He had always shown me respect. And my stepmom said, "Why did he lie to you?" I said, "It was to get me." She said, "Right. It wasn't to hurt you." And I think that's where we miss the intent. We don't look at the intent, right? And if we would start looking at the intent instead of the law is so screwed up right now. Our systems and structure, you think about who created our Constitution, five men wearing, wig wearing, slave owning men created the Constitution. Mm-hmm. And now 5 white men run most of the commissioners. I mean, most of our cities and governments are run by these same type of mentality that I grew up in. And I'm like, we need change in this world because that they're not dealing with their internal issues. I see it constantly. Right. And so now you've got a big wave and divide of change going and it needs to happen. But I restabilized our entire family this way because I knew that I wanted my kids to grow up with a family intact, and they are. And so we work together. Now, do we have issues? Yes, everybody's got issues, but we apologize quickly to those kids if we take them to counseling if we need a volley, and I manage it pretty simply with the boys. It's like, well, if as long as you make A's and B's and I'm not like super hardcore on them. Like a lot of parents I'm around, they got such high expectations on these kids. And I grew up with that. And let me tell you, it does not, I've boiled it down to 3 things that I needed as a child. I needed to feel loved, safe, and secure. And if I had that, I wouldn't have had the amount of emotional trauma that I've had if I just had those 3 things. So that's what I support those boys in. But to support my children, it also requires supporting those dads. Like they've got it's a 2-way street. If you have a child with someone, that someone is in your life. They say 18 years. No, until you're dead. Because I've got clients right now. I'm doing a probate case for a client that just passed of esophageal cancer at 44, and I'm working with his mother. Well, guess who's on the probate has to be named? His father too, right? So till the day you're dead, you are in that person's life. So you might as well learn to get along. And the courts are not going to help you do that. All they do.
No, I'm watching that right now. Yeah.
Each other, right? So go to a counselor instead and learn what to do. If you look in the mirror, you will solve most problems. Most problems start right in that mirror.
Crystal, I could talk to you all day. I think for somebody that has like gone through I'm just like truly blown away by you. You're a smart lady. And I think you know that. And you've just blown me away with this conversation today. Thank you so much for coming on. In closing, I want to ask, because I'm sure I'll have listeners that are going to want to reach out to you. How do people find you? Also, when is your book going to be out? Because I want to read it.
The book should be out early next year. The first one will be The Diaries of a Cult Girl, and the second one will be LAMS. It's an acronym for the 5 things they controlled: love, attitude, mind, body, spirit. So
okay, I'm going to have you back on. So when your book comes out, I would love to have you back on.
Awesome.
So in closing, so tell everyone where they can find you.
Yeah, crystalballadventures.com.
Okay. Crystal, I love talking to you today. You made, like I say this a lot when I interview people, because the beginning of today was not so fun. Lots of yelling. And I really needed to like talk to you and have you kind of put things in perspective for me. And you truly did that. So thank you for that. Everyone, please reach out to Crystal. Crystal, I think you're amazing. In closing, keep going. You matter. Your story matters.
Judging Meghan with Meghan Judge.